Well, now, our second critic is Deborah Doane from the World Development Movement. They believe that much of GAVI's work doesn't get at the real underlying problems in the world today. So what's your anxiety here?
Few would disagree with vaccinating millions of children. You can't disagree with that. I think the issue we have is that it's a bit of a distraction. So these sorts of top-down, business-led philanthropic solutions distract from the bigger picture.
Okay.
And that bigger picture is this. It's all well and good to be vaccinated against preventable diseases, but if you send those families back out and they don't have land on which to farm because it's been grabbed by big corporates because of land grabbing, or if they can't feed their families because of speculation on food prices, on food commodity prices, because they're spending 90% of their income on everyday foodstuffs and they can't educate their children, all of these things will be masked and lost, and we'll be having the same discussion in 20 years' time. The reason those bigger issues aren't dealt with, if I can just one more point,
sure,
is that you could look at progressive taxation could be far more important. Dealing with global monopolies could be far more important. Enabling people to have the policies to feed themselves would be a much more effective solution for dealing with poverty than vaccination programs.
This is about the children and the mothers of those children, and whether we take the technology that every rich child takes for granted and make it available. If she has a scheme to change the economic world order, that's all well and good. In the meantime, let's not let the millions of children die.
That's why you chose health as opposed to any other aspect of development.
Well, actually, I'm involved in many aspects of development.
This is the priority of the moment.
No, we do things actually at the same time. We do agriculture, we do sanitation.
You don't think you get in the way of governments?
I think children dying is not a good thing. I don't think any mother wants to see her children die. These vaccines are about saving those lives.
The accusation is not that you think it's a good thing. No one thinks it's a good thing that children die.
But they have been dying, and only with the generosity we saw today, only by getting these prices down, will their lives be saved.
If we spent more of our time, in developing public health programs, one of the concerns we have, much like MSF, is we're seeing public health and public interest sidelined over these technocratic solutions.
Wait a minute.
So in the instance of vaccinations, they favor big pharma. In the interest of when we're looking at another area of development, which I know you work in, we're looking at solutions that favors big agribusiness rather than small-scale farm production,
Right.
for example.
There's no favoritism. There's a bid price. The lowest price bid for the vaccines come in. Vaccines are public health. You can't contrast public health vaccines. Vaccines are the center of public health. They're the greatest victory of public health in all of history. That's why we're down from 20 million dying a year.
There's a question here of accountability too, isn't it? I mean, governments are accountable to their citizens. They win power, they lose power by the judgments they make. Who are you accountable to when you decide to make these, what everyone agrees are well-meant interventions?
Well, anyone who buys a product, if you buy a car, if you buy a house, you're you're taking your success and choosing what you're expressing your values. My values are that all the wealth I have should go back to society, and it should help the very poorest. And as I looked at all the ways to help out the poorest, vaccinations rose to the top of the list as the way to change their lives. The kids who live, if they don't get sick, their brains fully develop and they can achieve their potential. This is a pretty clear win, and the fact that, yes, malaria research is being done now and vaccines are being delivered, that's a great thing.
Dr. Sezibera, do you worry that why the Western governments or Western philanthropists like Bill Gates are making judgments on your behalf?
No, they are not making judgments on the behalf of the developing world. Developing world countries are co-financing these vaccines, the price of these vaccines. The health budgets are up. They are targets of 15%. Rwanda is already past 15%. Other governments are coming up. And yes, it is true that we must invest in roads and in agriculture and in food security, and governments are doing that. But our people must be alive. The children must be alive to enjoy these fruits, and that is the importance of vaccination.
I want to ask you one further question, Andrew Witty, and it's about a potential conflict of interest here. drug companies such as yourselves, which are both supplying medicines or vaccines and sitting on the board which makes judgments about whether they should be supplied. That's a conflict of interest, isn't it?
No. So GSK used to have a seat on the GAVI board. In fact, we've just rotated off it. There are 2 industry seats on the GAVI board. We've just come off, somebody else has just come on. The GAVI board, when you look around the table, almost everybody has some kind of vested interest. You're either a potential supplier or a potential recipient or a potential delivery agency. So everybody around that table more or less has a vested interest. What's been clear with the way the GAVI board operates is if anything specific comes up, of course, the member from the industry recuses himself from the meet, leaves the meet, of course. The balance here is that we don't end up in a situation where you don't have any expertise around the table. So we have people talking about the art of the possible without any knowledge of what actually goes on. And so having somebody there is important. I think, and this would pass any scrutiny over whether or not these people can assert any undue influence. I'm sure they do not.
All right, thank you, Deborah Doane. Finally, Ian Birrell, who's a journalist and a former speechwriter for David Cameron. The question, does aid actually work? Is it worth all this time and money? And in the long run, does it help those who are in need? What's your pitch?
Well, I do agree with Mr. Gates that actually vaccination is probably about the best use of aid and malaria research, and I think that's right. But I have a more fundamental issue with more fundamental problem with the whole issue of aid. By countries getting maybe half their income from aid are not going to have a need, and we can see this again and again, to respond to the needs of the people there. We're breaching accountability, and indeed Harvard Medical School has shown that when you put money in to health services, health spending declines. In places like Ethiopia and Rwanda, British aid is funding a government which is sending hitmen here, and on top of that, British aid directly funded a media council which banned newspapers, independent newspapers, and banned an electoral commission which stopped independent challenges. And I think all these self-appointed saviours, there is a problem and a reason why we keep hearing Western voices are always the voices for aid, not African voices, unless they're involved in the industry, because the image of Africa is being destroyed by aid. And that's why people see Africa as a supplicant rather than this fast-changing, growing place where 6 of the fastest-growing economies are there.
OK, let's deal with that last point as it's freshest in our minds first. Bill Gates, do you worry about who's driving this whole aid enterprise?
Well, the politically elected governments are by far the biggest donors here. And so politicians like David Cameron, they make a choice based on what they think the policies should be, and the voters will eventually get to weigh in, just like in many other countries.
What about this question of helping to support repressive regimes?
Well, certainly vaccination, I don't think it's quite a stretch to say that it supports repressive regimes, or maybe they should refuse the aid because that'll improve their image and just let the children die.
That wasn't what I was saying. I was saying British aid, not your aid. British aid has directly gone to repressive regimes. That's very different from the sort of things that you're doing.
Well, we do vaccination. When we decide to save children in a country, we don't go and look at everything the government's done and say, oh, they're not a very nice government. We're willing to fund vaccination for all the children of the world, independent of what's going on with that government.
Richard Sezibera, you, of course, are Rwandan, aren't you?
Yes.
So you stand accused in all of this to some degree.
Well, 2 things. First of all, it's not true that the Rwandan government sent hit squads all over the world. But I find
that Scotland Yard, of course,
I find the discourse a bit dispiriting because, on the one hand, British government, on the other, regimes. Now, the discourse of some people who look at Africa and the developing world as if we do not have universal values. And of course, if there is a repressive regime, the people in that country will raise up against that country, against their leaders through a democratic process.
Sure, but if your government is, the entire edifice of your country is being supported by Western aid, there is less incumbency upon you as a government to render yourself accountable to your citizens.
Absolutely. It is not correct that a government should be supported entirely by the Western world. And in fact, my own belief and the belief of many Africans is that we should use aid to get to win ourselves off aid. Now, it is the quality of the aid First of all, the aid must come in to fund a country-owned, country-designed, country-run program. And the more you do that, the better. And secondly, the accountability for delivery must be put where it belongs, on the shoulders of the leaders of these countries. If they can't, then they have to answer for it.
You're entirely comfortable with the way this whole thing operates, are you, Andrew Witty?
I share Bill's view to a large degree.
You've never had anxieties about a dependency culture, about the image of Africa?
I think on aid as a general concept, I would probably share some of the questions. I think it's really important when you talk about aid in the very biggest sense, but when you focus on vaccines, next to washing your hands, it's the single biggest healthcare intervention in history. And when you go to villages who have only just received their first solar-powered fridge, and as a result, for the very first time, people have been vaccinated against basic illnesses and diseases which are killing those children all of the time. When you see that actually happen on the ground, it's really difficult to walk away from that and say we shouldn't be trying to do this more often than we have been in the past.
Can I just finish with you, Bill Gates, on a personal note? Everyone in the world knows who you are, and everyone in the world almost uses your products in some way or another. Do you hope that this sort of initiative will be what you're remembered for?
I don't care to be remembered at all. I do hope that we can get that number of 9 million children a year who die down to 7 million, then 5 million, then 3 million. And there's some wonderful things in the work. Today was a big day, the pledging to buy these 2 new vaccines. We're partnered with GSK on a malaria vaccine that, with luck, in 3 years will be in a position to actually start delivering that. So the advances in technology should not just be for the richest. In fact, we should tilt our work to help the poorest. And that's why I'm excited about this second career that I've got.
Thank you all very much indeed. Thanks.